I wanted to welcome all of you to the GALSNGEAR Tequity HUB, where we dive into hot topics and career tips every single month, except perhaps in August when we take a little break. We are so grateful to our sponsors that make this free content possible, including AJA, Signiant, and Blackmagic Design, and our friends at the Dundee Hills Group and Wall Street Communications for helping us with the platform and our public relations. So thanks to all of you. And welcome our fabulous guest, Ashley Kennedy, who's going to jump into this topic on virtual and hybrid content and events. And I know you're going to learn a lot from Ashley. I've known her for a long time. We met at, I think, an NAB a million years ago, and we were both teaching workshops. She now teaches at LinkedIn Learning, and she's a senior staff instructor at LinkedIn, and she is absolutely passionate about creating and delivering engaging content for diverse audiences, which she does masterfully. So if you have LinkedIn Learning, go look her name up, because you'll see lots of courses, not just the course that she put in the chat, which is the one that she's done on creating live content. And, I think one of the things that I love so much about Ashley, aside from her background in film and video, and she's actually taught at Columbia College, Chicago, and Boston University and Avid Technology, and has spoken at dozens of conferences. But I also love that she's an actor in her spare time and is on the stage. So she really knows what it's like to have an actual audience and trying to keep them engaged. So welcome, Ashley.
Thank you, Amy. So good to see you. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm really honored and excited to talk about this topic that I am very passionate about.
So we're going to get started. I'm just going to give everyone a quick overview of some of the areas we're going to touch on. We're going to touch on, first of all, the power of live content and building trust through real-time authentic engagement. We're going to talk about having an audience-centered strategy so that your purpose and your message are aligned to your audience. We're going to talk a little bit about logistics and experience design because that's something that I think our audiences are getting very sophisticated about. And I see Armel Canet jumping on from Europe. Good to see you, Armel. She's with Host Broadcast Services, and so they've been very involved with us as well. They're obviously in the sports side of the industry, and so they do a lot of hybrid events. Promotion and preparation is another area we're going to talk about. Promoting effectively and rehearsing, and then of course execution and impact. So we've got a lot of areas to go into. What I would suggest is if you have questions along the way, just pop them into the chat. I'll keep an eye on that for both of us, Ashley, and that we can keep things pretty engaging as we go along, because we like to have a pretty lively discussion here on the GALSNGEAR Tequity Hub. So let's jump in to the topic of audience, because I think obviously before you even design an event, you have to know who's your audience, who are you trying to reach, how are you going to manage that? So I'm curious, kind of where do you think people should start with audience? Because I hear a lot of times people say, well, we want to reach everyone, and that's kind of complicated.
Yes, it is. If you are representing a company, a brand, or even yourself, you probably have an idea of who your audience is, where they primarily engage, and also the topics that they're interested in. But when you're actually choosing to go live, you really do need to sort of delve a little bit deeper than sort of the foundational knowledge that you have about that audience and get a sense of not only what they're interested in, but what's trending, what's topical at that moment. Go into forums and see what are really the hot topics of conversation. Go if you're going to conferences or virtual conferences. The topics for that moment, that season, are things that are just ripe with interesting things that you can use as your main talking points. Hot books and articles and blogs and all of those things. And when you're in these spaces engaging and asking questions, like literally just saying, what are you excited about? What isn't being talked about? And sending surveys, or just asking your friends, what is the most exciting thing that you want to hear about right now, are all things that you should be doing on top of just simply, kind of knowing what your audience is excited about in general. So this is, something I do before every live. I find a sort of an umbrella conversation topic, but then kind of going in and finding the nitty gritty of the things that are really going to be interesting, because that's how your audience is going to engage. And what you want is high audience engagement, because they're going to help you, promote the live by speaking and engaging within the live, and also promoting it with their audiences. So I can go in a little bit deeper, but I'll just sort of leave it there so that we can continue this conversation with regard to audience engagement. But really, just there's lots of exciting ways for you to find what your audience wants to talk about at any given time.
The one question I have, Ashley, is you talked about, topical issues. And I think that there's sort of a two different sets of live, if we're just talking about virtual for a moment. There's, maybe things like our Tequity Hub where we might plan 2 or 3 or 4 months in advance. But then there's like conferences where they're planned a year in advance. And so you can't, I mean, of course, we know that, for example, AI, that's going to be a hot topic probably for the foreseeable future in various iterations. But how could you be sort of topical and yet still do that long-term advanced planning?
Well, it's sort of a two-tier approach. You kind of aim at that umbrella topic in, 6 months, 10 months, a year in advance, but you don't actually need to plan the specific nitty-gritty topics of that conference until closer to that. So as long as you have enough knowledge and research to sort of throw that dart and be like, I think this is basically the topic that we are going to be able to cover, so that the learning objectives of that actual live or hybrid event will be true to the title of that conference. But as you get closer, you can start to perform that deeper level research and, kind of really form a more topical version of that conference as the time gets closer. Right now, if I was to pitch NAB conference topics in April, I would, quite easily be able to pitch, 4, 5, 6 topics. But it's not until, late February that I'm actually starting to create those trainings. And so, you just got to know that you're going to have a couple of nets that you're going to cast, and one is wide and one is a little bit narrower, and it really just depends in that timing as to how that comes together. But usually
Right.
you're able to do that.
Well, and part of that could be the design that you put together. So let's say you're doing, whether it's a live event or a hybrid event, you have your topics, you have your themes, perhaps you even have your speakers booked, because a lot of times,
Right.
especially with headliners, they need to be booked pretty far out. But maybe you wait until closer to figure out your breakout topics. And so if you're doing hybrid, you have breakout rooms virtually online as well as breakouts in the actual room. You might have those moderated, but wait till a little closer to pick the topics. Does that sound about right
Exactly.
as a
Yeah.
strategy?
Yeah. And so what you're talking about is what I was talking about with regard to, like, if it was a sort of a single person driven format. But when you are with collaborators, if you have interview subjects, if you have guests or panelists that you're bringing in, same exact strategy applies. You book them far in advance. You say, this is basically where we're going to land. But then, I'm all about prep meetings. You really want to make sure to have a couple of them in the works leading up to the event. The first one is usually like, what's exciting to you, what's trending, what's topical, where should we go with this? And then, the follow-up one after that is where you've actually done your homework, done your research, have very targeted interview questions or breakout topics that you land on and that you sort of talk about. And that's where this is usually just, a couple of weeks before the event, where everyone has just sort of landed on, all right, this is where we're going to go with this. So
Mhm.
so yeah, sort of
Mhm.
the long range, and then you kind of like come in for, all right, this is where I think we're hitting, and then the follow-up one is, this is where we've landed.
Mhm. Well, and I think you bring up a good point, because there are different touch points. And I hate it when I'm on the receiving end as a speaker and they have me doing lots and lots of these prep meetings, but they're so far ahead that it's a little too far ahead to come up with some of those topical issues. So I think it's good to have sort of that dual strategy. And I'm curious about, engaging the audience when you're going entirely virtual versus engaging multiple audiences when you're going hybrid. Can you speak a little bit to like those two parallel but slightly different strategies?
Yes. So I'll start with the 100% virtual live cast. And even if you do have a guest or a collaborator or someone else that is like, for example, you and I right now, if we were going live and we had a large audience, you really do have to think of that audience as the third seat at the table. So I'm talking. I want to engage with you. I want us to have a good dynamic. We should have a good chemistry and a nice back and forth and be listening truly to one another. But you can't forget that third chair. And the third chair is actually dozens or hundreds or thousands of people. And you can't forget them either. They're absolutely part of that conversation. And if you actually think about it, there's a fourth chair because there's the replay audience. So you want to make sure to engage with your live audience, and it takes practice to see the comments come in and be able to address them. When I first started out many years ago, it would be like ping pong, and I'd like see a comment and I'd like want to bring it in, and it would be a little bit scattershot in terms of like how I brought the audience's comments in. But
Mhm.
I'm seasoned enough now where I start to group them thematically, and I don't bring
Yeah.
them in as they come in. Instead, I have a system where I thematically group these different audience interactive comments, and then I say Joe from Minnesota and Mary from Seattle and Jose from Mexico City are all talking about this, and I bring it in at the moment that it makes sense for the
Right.
conversation. So
Right.
you're really sort of grouping and you're calling people out, you're making them feel special, you're making them feel heard, but you're kind of like
Right.
bringing it in thematically so that it makes sense at the conversation, or sorry, with in the topic of
Right.
conversation. And again, when I talk about that fourth seat in terms of the replay audience, you need to find some way to make them feel special as well. So, there's a lot of ways to do that, in terms of making sure that they add their comments as they are viewing it, and you find a way to sort of follow up and continue to engage with that replay audience in different ways. But yeah, it's so important to do that and to do it early, because as the live cast is happening,
Mhm.
algorithmically, live casts are more seen when the engagement is happening real time. So that's why so many live cast hosts say, tell us where you're coming from, where you're tuning
Right.
in from, what do you hope to get out of this, because as those comments are coming in early, the networks of the people
Mhm.
that are uh, people's friends and connections see that they're engaging with this live cast, and then they're more likely to join. So
Right.
you want to find ways early on to sort of like encourage that engagement, even if it's find also low level ways for them to start engaging, rather than saying, what do you hope to get out of this. You can say, put in a thumbs up emoji if if you've never if you've or so put in a light bulb emoji if you've never gone live before, or put in a thumbs up emoji if you've gone live a few times, or put in a heart emoji if you love going live, if the topic is going live,
Right.
so that people can start to use the emojis as a polling feature. And then, oh my gosh, that's
Mhm.
all of a sudden getting a lot of engagement in your live cast, which is
Right.
going to like create that buzz
Right.
algorithmically online.
Exactly. One thing I like to do is I usually actually choose a letter of the alphabet to be clapping instead of the clapping emoji or the hand clap. So,
Smart.
so let's say since we're Gals and Gear, if everybody wants to clap for you, if they just put a bunch of G's in, so put a bunch of G's in the chat, everybody, to clap for Ashley. So let's just demonstrate that right now, and see. Then you get like people kind of going. and you kind of get them engaged. So it's really helpful to do that. So that's one of my little tricks for when I'm hosting live interactions. And you're absolutely right that really important to have an MC who's experienced with virtual or live hosting, because it's a very different experience than hosting on a stage. And I've also had people who host on the stage and have a screen for the remote people. But they really have to be very facile at like answering questions in the room, going to the screen and answering questions remotely. And it's not for everyone. And thank you for all the applause, everyone. Appreciate that. And so I think, that's something that I had to practice and did a lot of during COVID when I was hosting a lot of virtual events. And one in particular that I remember where I had an average of 250 people per live cast coming from the US and Japan. And those two audiences were very different. It was for the US Japan Bridging Foundation. And so, how I would engage the Japanese audience might be a little different than how I'd engage the US audience. But they were like incredibly lively chats. So it was a lot to keep up with, both comments in the chat and sometimes also in the Q&A. I'm curious about when you're doing audience engagement, then we'll move on to a couple of these other questions because I know we have a lot to cover today. But one last question I have about audience is, what are some of the things that have worked for you in terms of the remote audience? Like, for example, speed dating style networking or breakout rooms, or how to sort of engage people on more intimate levels and then coming back to the big event. Have you done any of those kinds of things?
Yeah, you do have to be mindful about these different approaches because some people are extremely energized by getting into smaller groups and engaging on a smaller level and then coming back and sharing. And some people hate it. Like
Right.
if you are if you're an introvert that is not energized by that sort of smaller environment, talking to strangers, it can be painful. So I am careful with that. It's important to give it a lot of context and prep to give
Right.
people some time to really consider what it is that they're going to talk about and say
Mhm.
within these
Right.
smaller breakout rooms. The worst thing that I think you can do is just, all right, we're going to breakout rooms, talk about this.
Right.
You need
Yeah.
to set it up in a way that at the very beginning or like early on in that experience, you need to say, in a half an hour, we're going to be talking, we're going to give you the opportunity to get into these groups and to talk about this topic. So be thinking about now, here's the prompts, like literally make a graphic. Here are the prompts that we're going to be, focusing on. Because people who are more uncomfortable engaging in that way are also usually find comfort in prep time and in getting
Right.
an
Right.
opportunity to really get a sense of what
And
they're going to
and
talk about.
maybe have a moderator in each room if you can. It's
That
not
would
always
be ideal,
possible.
yeah. I mean, to
Or at
have
least have a self-selected, someone who doesn't mind sort of organizing that conversation, so it's a little more
taking the
productive.
pressure off it, because a lot of
Right.
times you get into those smaller breakout rooms and it isn't clear.
Right.
Yeah, maybe
Right.
you know what you're
What are
supposed
you
to talk
doing?
about, but like the flow and all of that.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and
so
also you often don't have a lot of time. Like you have 10 minutes, and by the time everyone's introduced themselves, the 10 minutes is over.
yeah.
Um,
And you don't want a quarter of the virtual experience to be painful for anyone. And so
right.
you really do, yes, you want to energize those that love that format, but those that don't love it, you want to make it friendly enough so that they will succeed and not feel, just
Hmm.
totally
Right.
stressed the entire time that they're in there. So,
Right.
I always focus on lots of time, lots of prep, lots of clarity. Clarity
Right.
is kind in terms of what they're going to be talking about. And yes, having a dedicated moderator in each one is ideal if it's possible.
Right. Well, and this is a good time for me to actually shout out our Tequity Hub, because one of the things, this is the live platform that was created by Dundee Hills Group for us and others. We have our own sort of environment here. And when we've done live events here, one of the things I really like about it is that you have agency. So rather than being put into a breakout room, we could say, for those of you who want to talk about this particular issue in virtual content, we're going to jump, you're going to jump into the connect zone. Or for those who are interested in talking to Ashley afterwards, you can jump into the cafe and she'll be there to answer questions. And so we let people move around of their own free will, so to speak. And there might be people who don't want to do that, and so they want to go and look at some of these other things that we have on the hub. So that's something that we found is really successful for our events, and allows the attendees to kind of have some agency about where they go and what they do, which has been really successful. And that kind of brings me to technology integration, because I think this is like the big thing. Obviously Zoom was pre-COVID, but went crazy during COVID, and there's lots of other platforms out there. And I know that for those people who are integrating for international audiences, I think it's really important to integrate live captioning and translations. So I'm just curious if there's some sort of things you would tick off that are kind of must-haves at this point for technology integrations, regardless of platform.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, so many of the third-party streaming platforms have all of the features that you mentioned, with regard to the live captions are just so important, and the ability to break out and to have a lot of different methods of flexibility and formats to cater to different audiences. But in terms of other technical tools and sort of tips that you need to make sure that you have in place. Obviously, the number one thing is a reliable internet connection and a backup reliable internet connection. Right now, I'm wired right in. I really do recommend a wired connection if at all possible. If that's not possible, making sure that you have a dedicated Wi-Fi source and asking others that use your Wi-Fi to limit or not use the Wi-Fi during the live cast is always something that if I'm ever going live and my husband's working from home, I'll sort of send him to our secondary Wi-Fi, so that I can have all of the resources. And then also I also always have my phone with a hotspot as backup, because there was one time that the internet company was doing work in my neighborhood, and I completely lost all internet, like not only Wi-Fi, but
Oh, wow.
but wired internet as well. It's just Comcast came in and it's just like, we're doing work
And did
right
their
now.
special Comcast thing.
Yeah, and so, but I
Okay.
didn't I was able to hotspot off my phone, so
Right.
and that is, it's still fast enough. Like I did,
Wow.
40
Yeah.
of the 60 minutes live hotspotted off my phone, and no one, I
Wow.
lost connectivity from the live cast for just a few, probably 15, 20 seconds until I sort of pivoted
That's
and was able to
amazing.
rejoin from my
That's
hotspotted
smart.
phone.
That's super smart. I think I'm gonna have to start doing that.
Yeah, well, and I
Because
mean,
I
in
have a
addition,
wired connection, but like you said, if that goes down.
yeah, you never know. And so having, yeah, I have my phone here with the hotspot, like, the settings screen kind of like open in case that I do need that. And also a second device, like, it's probably not going to happen, but my computer could crash. And so, like,
Right. No.
having another computer or an
Right.
iPad or a
So then,
phone even to join in,
right.
as another device is smart as
Hmm.
well. So just
Right.
always have your primary reliable source and then a backup source if
Right.
possible.
Right.
And
I would
if
also say one idea, Ashley, that I've used also for participants, if they're speakers, is to be sure they have a second screen available, because a lot of times we'll do polling, and I think it's a little awkward to have that coming up on your screen, like
yeah,
over your picture. I mean, I've got three screens going right now, actually, because I've got you and I've got the questions in the chat. I have my notes and I have some other information on another screen. So I just kind of like to have a bunch of different things in front of me. And I often will run through that because it depends on your panelists. They may not be techies necessarily, depending on your topic, or they may be very technical, but they're experts on ATSC 3.0 and they know nothing about like being a podcast guest or whatever. So I think it's really helpful to prep your guests. And I know that a couple of people have asked about, making sure that you have this backup system and making sure that your panelists do as well. So I think that's important. Any other tricks or tools while we're talking about technology integration?
You do want to make sure that you have usually a second device, but you can also make sure that it's muted on your second screen of the live cast itself,
Right.
to make sure. I mean, there's been times when it's very obvious that I haven't gone live. The screencasting software has failed, or that I've frozen. You know, you always want to make sure that you're aware of what the live experience is for your audience. And this is also obviously if some screencast or live cast software allows you to see the comments in software, and some allow you to chat back, and some don't. And some you like, for example, I go live on LinkedIn primarily, and I use a screencasting software, or a live casting software that lets me see the comments, but it doesn't allow me to type back in. So I have to have the actual live page up in order to engage with my audience. Oh, another thing, technically, if I know that the live cast is going to be extremely well attended, remember I said before where I am like collecting the comments thematically and grouping them based on the topic of conversation. Sometimes it's just, if there's hundreds of people and the comments are
Right.
coming super, super fast, there's no way that I can manage the live cast and collect those comments in real time. So what I'll do is I will have a collaborator backstage, it'll be one of my colleagues that is watching the comments, and then what he or she does is populate a Google Doc with those comments, and then that person is grouping together comments together
Right.
thematically.
I was just going to suggest having a right-hand person.
Yeah, and then all you're doing then, you're not actually looking at the live page, you're looking at the Google Doc, and that person's sole job is to basically collect all the comments that are worthy of inclusion in the conversation,
Mhm.
and then grouping them thematically,
Right.
and then I have them move them to the top. So it's basically
Right.
like, here's the stuff that's real, people are really wanting to know. This is what they're interested in. This is what they want to talk about. Because usually it's like, 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, comments that are all based on this theme, and I'm having them move that to the top so that I
Right.
know that that is topically what people are
Right.
wanting to talk
Right.
about.
Well, and what's nice about the Google Doc, which is an idea I'm now going to borrow,
Mhm.
is that you could share that afterwards. So maybe you don't get to absolutely every comment or whatever. You could add some other feedback and what have you, and then share that back. Because you were talking about your video on demand audience and making sure that you satisfy them as well. So something that they can take away from it, some kind of shared experience, saying that this will be available for everybody, whether you're live or on demand. Now we've got a bunch of questions, so I do want to get to
Sure.
those. One of the questions is, how do you engage your audience, the virtual audience, besides chat? And I would say polling obviously is a big one. Is there anything else that you've used that's a great tool or strategy for engaging the virtual audience?
Well, if you're on a social media feed, which again I am because I go live on LinkedIn, I will, often have prompts for sharing the actual live event,
Mhm, mhm,
and a request for what it is that they're excited about, that they're most engaged with, that they find interesting, so that they, again, this is a good algorithmic hack of, not, don't just engage within this chat, but if you are able to share this with your audience about why you think this could be interesting to their connections, that's actually gold, because not only, it algorithmically,
mhm.
that is a wonderful way to share early, I guess, and then you kind of bring that back up midway through, 3/4 of the way through, so that you have a little bit more meat, a little bit more content in terms of like what's
Right.
been the most exciting thing so far that is, you think would be interesting to your
Mhm.
connections
Right.
and friends and followers. Um, and then again, that's a way for them to sort of like engage in sort of a meta way, and then
Right.
also it's algorithmically, it's wonderful if that can
Yeah.
happen during the live cast, because then people can hop into yours.
Right. And one thing
Um,
that I've done, just to throw in an idea, is for something usually not so much for a business event, although I have actually done it once for a business event. If you have registrations, then you have a superpower because then you could actually send people something. Now, not if you have thousands and thousands, but I did a virtual high school reunion during COVID, and we had registrations. So we had a moment where we were doing cocktail hour preparations, and we had 3 different people who were ready at their home and had it set up with with their laptop or camera, whatever, that they were going to teach everybody how to make whatever the cocktail was. And we sent kits to everybody in advance, so everybody had the ingredients inside, little nuts and whatever, cocktail napkins and all this kind of stuff, so everybody could like unbox at the same time and feel really connected and do this. And we had virgin cocktails as well as regular alcoholic cocktails, all that stuff. So, there's ways you can do that. You can really engage your audience, but you have to think ahead, obviously, and plan ahead. So that's another thing we can do. We have a bunch of other questions, so I'm
okay.
wondering if we can jump into some of those.
Yeah.
One of the things is, how do you deal with playing videos, latency issues, et cetera? I mean, this is like kind of an ongoing challenge, I think, because it's not so much us, the broadcaster, so to speak, because our latency might be fine. It's the recipients is usually where I have the struggle because their internet connections aren't. I pay for like the super duper high level.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ashley? How do you manage that?
Um, well, some live casting platforms, again, I use StreamYard, allow you to uh, kind of upload and play video sort of natively from that rather than you playing it as a screen share from your system. So that can be helpful if
Mhm.
the video is actually living in that live cast environment and it plays from there. Um, if you're over Zoom and you need to play a video, so you are sort of screen sharing, and there's lots of things. You need to check that box that says use system sound, and make sure that people can hear and see everything. And then you're checking. You're like, are you seeing and hearing the video okay? So it can be a little awkward. I will
Mhm.
if obviously if the video lives online, which I always make sure that it does, I will also put a link in the chat saying if you're having any trouble viewing this video, here's a link to it. And I'll do that
Yes.
early. I'll just be like, if you have any trouble playing this, go ahead and just,
Right.
mute this, play it yourself, and so that there's a way a
Right.
backup way for them to access whatever content that may or may not be technically working on their end.
That is a great idea. And I would say this kind of goes back to having your helper manage the chat, because usually if I'm doing something that has a lot of technical complexity to it, so maybe you're going to throw out a lot of technical terms, or you want people to have like articles with more information, I gather all that information in advance. So I've been like co-hosting a webinar series for a big organization that's across the country with 50 chapters. And so if it's my turn to be the assistant, so to speak, to one of my colleagues, I get all of their links in advance so I can just copy paste them into the chat at the appropriate moment and look super on the ball. And they've already, provided those to me. So that's a great idea, is just to have another way to view video. And I think the other thing that's important is, thinking about your platform in advance and testing it.
Yeah.
You can do a private link, even, and do a test without your full audience just to see how everything works. Isn't that the case, Ashley?
Yeah, I mean, I am a huge proponent of testing and rehearsing. And it's if possible, if it's one of, if you're new to going live, you can anticipate audience questions. And a lot of times, what I will recommend to people that are doing this for the first time is to anticipate like all of the questions that could possibly come up and pre-populate a
Mhm.
document and try and practice answering them on the fly. But also, if you can recruit a couple of test audience members on a a pre-show run through, and have them come up with stuff so that you can practice answering things on the
Right.
fly as well, because you can anticipate and you can um, you know practice answering your own pre-planned questions all day long, but it really is a totally different beast in learning to answer questions that you haven't thought of. And so to actually
Right.
have some experience doing that from a test audience, it can be really
Mhm.
valuable.
That is a great idea. And I know Francis, who's on here, who's run a lot of hybrid events, and I are both big fans, as you are, of speaker prep, because a lot of times, a speaker may be booked, probably not by us, maybe by a client or somebody, says we have to have so and so, but they're not necessarily geared towards looking directly into the camera or doing those questions on the fly. Somebody mentioned to me that they do a lot of work in the defense area. So they have what we call stars and bars, these people with a lot of impressive credentials, but like their specialty is not, being a broadcaster. And so that's another thing where, the preparation is really important. And even for your hosts, Jin Sun mentioned in the chat, we're both looking into the camera. So how are we managing our notes? Well, Ashley and I have done this for a very, very long time, and I'm glancing at my notes once in a while. I'm sure she is too, but we've gotten really good at talking to the camera and not necessarily looking at the little box, which is down here of my picture of Ashley or her picture of me. Am I right, Ashley?
Yes, the when I am when I am hosting a live cast, I have a very specific way that I set up my screen so that it, even if I'm not looking into the camera, it looks like I'm looking into the camera. So
Right.
right now I am looking
Exactly.
into the camera, but what I'll do is I will copy and paste all of my interview questions on a Word document, and then I will really make the margins super big so that the
Yep.
text is a really thin line
Thin
of
little
text.
narrow column, and you can stick it right up under the
And yeah,
camera.
and you make the font large. So I do like a font of 18, and it's a very thin line of text. And then I will just use my mouse scroll wheel and scroll so that I right now it looks like I'm looking at the camera, but I'm actually only looking at the top line of text. And then if I'm scrolling here, I'm reading, and that's really, I mean, I'm not doing that right now. I'm just speaking off the cuff right now. But
Right.
if I was running a live cast, I'm like, hi, welcome. I'm talking to Amy DeLouise about going live, and if I'm reading a script right now, I'm just scrolling with my mouse scroll wheel as it's coming up. Because my margins are so large, I'm not like my eyes are not. You don't see the eye trace of me like reading back and forth. It's like a DIY teleprompter. So I have my questions right in the middle. I have
Mhm.
my live cast software off to the right, and I try to pin my guest's picture very, very
Yes.
close to the camera so that even when I am looking at them, I'm
Right.
just like glancing at them to look at their, nonverbal cues, but
Yes.
it allows me to still look into the camera. And then usually down below, I have kind of my another Word document that has all of my resources, like the videos that I'm going to play, the articles, the any
Mhm.
type of URL or reference, because that allows me to very quickly copy and paste that into the chat when I need to, and I have it in
Right.
the relative order that I think I'm going to be able that I need to reference them. And then on
Those
my
are great.
second monitor, I have the live cast itself so that I'm able to just check in and make sure that I am going live, that there's no frozen video. I'm able to see the comments come in. And then of course I mentioned that extra Google Doc if I know it's going to be a super busy live. I have
Mhm.
that over to
Mhm.
the left as well so that I can constantly monitor that. And again, I ask my collaborator to always pop the hottest stuff comment wise up to the top of that.
Right. Well, and one other thing that Jinsun noticed was that neither one of us is wearing headphones and a mic. And I have some very strong feelings about that, and I'm curious what yours are, Ashley.
Yeah, so just so you know, this this is the microphone that you guys are hearing right now, and if I could be using this and have really really high quality sound, but all I do is I'm positioning it right out of frame so that it's about this far away from my mouth, because I do aesthetically prefer a non headset look
Right.
to that. You can also just do a stand up USB mic. You can do a lavalier. You can
Mhm.
do sort of a less
Right.
bulky headset mic. It's whatever aesthetic you're going for that sort of like speaks to what your brand and how you want to present yourself.
Right.
But this is just sort of what what I go with. And in
Right.
terms of yeah, I just have my speakers. I'm hearing you all from my Mac speakers. I feel that usually works
Right.
just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I like to use a lavalier, Jensen. I really detest that whole headset mic. I feel like it's a bit of a tech bro look, which is not really my gals and gear look. That's just me personally. Sorry, tech bros. I love you. I'm married to one of you. I think also I do feel like it interferes with my relationship with the audience, but that's just me. I know a lot of people host podcasts and other things, and they love having the headset, or they like to have the mic in the frame, because that's kind of part of their look. So I think that's really all about how you establish your own personal brand look, as Ashley said, or the look of your conference or event. Because I think it really depends on the event. And obviously, if you're, doing a sporting event or something, that people are going to have handheld mics as they're interviewing, the athletes as they come off the field or whatever. That's part of the look. So I think you have to make a determination about that. But I do think high quality audio is important, which goes back to your testing. So as long as you've tested it and you are happy with the audio,
And
then
you
you
know,
can
during
choose.
the when I talked about rehearsing with a test audience, I will always have a test check-in with my interviewee or collaborator as well. And that is obviously to go over the
Mhm.
questions, the content, the
Sure.
flow, ask if they have any questions, make sure they're comfortable. I will do it in the live cast environment so that they are
Mhm.
aware of all of the tools
Right,
that are available to them in terms of the chat, in terms of like how the
right,
comments are coming
right.
in terms of like the overlays and the branding. I'll just sort of give them
Mhm.
a little bit of an orientation so that it's not all like new and shiny the day of. But it is also a tech check. So I'm checking their mic, I'm checking their audio, I'm checking their video, I'm checking their lighting, I'm checking their background. A lot of times I'll be like, they're up against a totally
A
blank,
wall.
yeah. And so I'll be like, can you
Yeah.
move your computer around
Right.
like 180 degrees? Maybe there's a different background that'll be a little bit more aesthetically
Right.
pleasing.
Try
Sometimes
to avoid the
there's
the up the nose shot, which I thought people would have solved, during
it
COVID,
still happens, yeah.
but you'd be surprised. And I've interviewed like the heads of major broadcast networks, and they're doing it on their laptop with the up the nose shot. So you
And the
definitely
other
have to
thing
do.
that like during that check-in, and usually the check-in is quick, 20-minute check-in,
Mhm.
um, I will ask them a couple, like no more than two questions from the actual interview. You don't want to do them all, or you don't want to
Right,
burden them at that point because you want the spontaneity and freshness
right,
of their
right,
responses to come out in the interview. But
right.
the reason that you ask them a couple of questions in that preparatory check in meeting is to see how they answer questions. Are they long-winded, or do they answer questions super succinctly? And so that'll allow you, and hopefully it's a couple days before, that'll allow you to be like, all right, this person is really long-winded. I'm going to need some strategies to sort of reel that in. Or this person answers questions really succinctly. I'm going to need a lot of follow-up questions in order to like, round that out.
Right.
So it's a way for you to gauge the chemistry that you have with the guest, as well as figuring out strategies that you may need to enact in order to sort of make
Mhm.
the interview the best it can be. Because if you don't know
Right.
how they answer questions until the day of, you're
Yeah.
scrambling. You're like, I don't have any follow-up questions to get more meat out of this, or oh my God, this is so stressful. I'm having to cut them off and reel them in on every single response. You don't want that. You want to make sure that you at least have like an idea of their approach in advance.
That is true. Do we have any other questions? Because we are actually getting very close to our end time. I want to be sure we answer questions. I know a lot of you produce events for a living or produce content that are roll-ins. So are any of you out there thinking of burning questions? Maybe Armel, I know I happen to be looking at you in the group, so not to put you on the spot, but if there's something that's more specific to your world, feel free to ask. While I'm letting people think about questions, I want to remind people about a couple of very important dates to put on their calendar. April 8th, which is a Tuesday, so we can call it Tequity Tuesday, is our upcoming leadership summit, which will be at the National Association of Broadcasters Convention in Las Vegas, our favorite place to gather with 80,000 of our best friends in media and broadcast. We would love to have all of you there. Last year, we had so many subscriptions to the registrations that they had to stop taking them because we maxed out the room and the fire marshal was going to get mad at us. So they've given us a bigger room this year, which is exciting. So if you're at all thinking about coming out to Vegas, please put Tuesday, April 8th on your schedule. It's a half-day conference, goes from breakfast through lunch. And I think it's going to be very powerful. So put that on your calendars. Or Mel has a question. Do you recommend and encourage camera on for participants, or are you okay with camera off?
I think that is something that should be, if possible, you should give the choice to the participants. Hopefully you're not talking about the actual interviewee or collaborator.
No.
They should be
Yeah.
camera on. But if you
Right.
have a group like this, it's a personal choice with regard to having the camera on or off. And as long as it doesn't interfere with the format, the content, the flow, then there's no reason that people can't, kind of exercise their own choice there, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that you can alienate people if you force them. I mean, I think some people, it depends how they're watching, where they're watching, what kind of hair day they're having, whatever, there's children in the background, whatever the issue is. So I think, yeah, that shouldn't really be required for participants. Now, I do know that as a speaker, I prefer to be able to kind of see live bodies out there once in a while. So sometimes what I'll do is if it's a really long, let's say it's a webinar or something that's going on longer even than that, I might say, at one point, for those of you who are comfortable, everybody's gonna turn cameras on just to get a moment together kind of thing. Or especially if we're doing breakouts, I think it's hard to do a breakout without cameras on because, as you mentioned, Ashley, people do have cues, visual cues that you pick up on. So I do think that's really helpful. But otherwise, I think it's up to people to do what they are comfortable with. Do we have any other questions before we wrap things up? I know some of you are big question askers, so especially for those of you producing hybrid events, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. A couple of more dates to put on your calendar. I'm just reading off of our upcoming Tequity Hub events. We do have on December 17th, Careers in Sports and Esports. That's going to be fantastic. Addie Rose is going to join us. She's been a TD for esports and Formula One. Louisa Mendoza, who's a DP for sports, and also Wendy McEnroy from OBS. So I think that's going to be a pretty exciting group of women. And January 14th, we have a sneak preview of one of the speakers for our leadership conference with Tacey Roby. It's about being money smart women, financial planning for media pros. I'm sure all of us can use that in these times. So that's going to be an exciting one. And in February, we're going to have Storage Quest, all about the search for the perfect storage solution, especially for those of us working with virtual distributed teams. So those are going to be great things. One last question from Danilda. What are the 1 to 2 big don'ts for somebody getting started on producing live content?
Well, I live sometime, the ease, anyone can go live anytime they want. So the ease of going live and having that intimacy and having that connection to your audience and having just the access issue in terms of people having access to you in the moment can be seductive. It can be like a very just attractive thing to just go for it and get in that space because it is so easy to do. If you're going to write a 1,500-page article, that takes time. If you're going to create a 10-minute video or a 5-minute video of that takes time. You're going to need to record it or write the script and record it and edit it. But live is so easy that people sometimes overestimate how that they can just go and wing it. And doing that is probably the biggest mistake of people beginning in this space. It really still does require that research, that planning. I do, even if you don't rely on scripts, writing at least an outline and then, making sure to internalize that content with rehearsals is an important part of it. And then making sure that you have the ability to engage on the fly with a live audience is also very important. So putting in all that prep is, especially for beginners, a really, really important part of the
Mhm.
process. Um, I have seen when live with, during the beginning part of the pandemic, when people were going live all the time, it's just it could be painful to watch people like try it for the first time when they haven't put in the prep. Another
Right.
thing that I don't love when people are just starting out is that you don't actually get to the content until like 3 4 minutes in, because they're like, I think we're just gonna start to wait for more people to join before we get going, blah 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 blah. And I will often just like bounce out at that point. If I'm an
Right.
audience member and I'm just sort
And
of like
just,
coming
yeah.
in like, oh, what's this? And they're in that like 3 minute period of time where they're not
Yeah.
saying anything and just allowing people to like come into the stream. I'm just like, this person is not engaging, not prepared, not, doesn't have my attention.
Right.
And that is really kind of just a turnoff for me as an audience member. I think that you sort of build in a 3 minute period of time, whereas if someone didn't come in into that 3 minutes, they're still going to be fine because you don't get to the meat of what you're going to be
Right.
talking
But you're
about
still
until that
chatting
like
about something.
you have to be, yeah, you have to come out hot, you have to come out strong, you have to come out with a smile, you have to come out with that energy, you have to begin inviting people into the conversation, you have to find ways to be
Right.
have that energy and have that engagement right off the bat. But there are so many people, especially in the beginning part of the pandemic, that were just like, "Oh, we're just gonna wait," and it's just I can't stand it. And so I recommend against that. I recommend building in a structured um, uh, beginning to the show with energy so that you can kind of like grab your audience, invite them in, make sure that they can engage, and then you're 3 minutes in, you get into the meat. So you sort of like build that in anyway, but it's a nice way to make sure you don't lose those people in the beginning.
Good idea. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Ashley, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we close out?
I really, if you haven't done this before, I encourage you to do it. You can start small. You can really, whatever you're passionate about, whatever is really in your wheelhouse that you can speak on, maybe start there and invite a guest that is also passionate about that, so that, if the guest drops out, or if there's a technical error, you still have the expertise and the wherewithal to sort of continue on
Right.
and speak because you have that knowledge. So it's a sort of a nice built-in way for you to speak about something that you are passionate about, and then sort of alleviate any concerns with regard to technical hiccups, because you can always take up ownership and have the agency to continue the conversation
Right.
in case the guest isn't exciting or engaging, or in case they drop out, anything like that. Sort of start in a safe space, I would say.
Right. Well, and for those of us who are producing hybrid events, I'm producing a big one actually with Danilda and Zuri, who are on this call, coming up next week, which will be in a big broadcast studio and will be live streaming. And we have 6 or 7 different guests and segments and roll-in videos and all the rest of it. The preparation piece is so key because, as you say, even in that environment where everybody's been invited and have known about it forever, somebody could drop out. We have a couple of very experienced MCs who can riff if needed and have a lot of background expertise of their own on the subject matter. So, as you said, Ashley, if a panelist dropped out, they would be totally fine. Uh, Talking to each other or riffing on it individually. I mean, you just have to be prepared for all possibilities. So I think there's even more preparation in some ways for hybrid, because then you're really producing 2 events. You're producing the live stream and you're producing whatever's happening in the room for the
Mhm.
people there. So both of them have to be good experiences, and both of them have to have some kind of story arc that makes sense to the participants, both there and afterwards on demand.
Absolutely. And then of course, repurposing the live in a lot of different ways is also a great way for your follow-up audience. Shorter videos, little sound bites, excerpts, even just screenshots with text and making, graphics and memes and that sort of thing. There are so many possibilities to repackage it afterwards, if that's important to you for your
Totally, totally. And that's a
follow-up audience.
great point. So again, for the event that Denilda and I are working on, she's going to be coming and shooting some BTS in the studio while it's happening live. So then that will also contribute to the social media stream afterwards, as well as the repackaged elements that you mentioned. So, I think all of those are important. I mean, we're in this multi-platform world now where everything's happening all the time on every possible surface. Lots of moving parts, as Danilda says in the chat. And with that, we're going to wrap up this Tequity Hub conversation about live and virtual events. It's just always great to have all of you here. We'll wrap up the recording, and then anybody who wants to stay on and just say hello, we'll do that. Thanks for joining us for Gals and Gear, and thanks again to Ashley for spreading her incredible knowledge with us.
Thank you, everyone. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you can.